Welcome to Love and Trauma, the real deal. I'm Danielle Sebastian, best-selling author, coach, and yes, I've been through the marriage trenches myself. This show is all about how to actually deal with trauma in relationships and make it work without losing your mind. If you're ready for honest talk, no fluff, and tools that cut through the noise, tune in because let's face it, love can be a bit of a mess, but it's a mess worth figuring out. This is Love and Trauma, the real deal.
Have you ever wondered what it actually feels like for a childhood trauma survivor when they're triggered? Or how living in a constant state of stress and hyper alertness to danger shapes their day to day lives, the way they parent, the way they love, and even their health? In this episode, I'm sitting down with Emily Clayhorn. She is the author of Rising from the Ashes: How to Reclaim Your Life After a Traumatic Childhood. And Emily doesn't just talk about the impact of trauma, she lives it, works through it, and shares how she's turning it into something powerful and healing for others. She's going to open up in this conversation about how her past has shaped her as a mother, how her triggers affected her relationships, and how she's breaking the generational cycle of trauma for her kids. We'll dive deep into what it really feels like to live with the scars of childhood trauma, and more importantly, how healing and hope are absolutely possible. And if you stick around to the end, Emily gets incredibly honest about the lessons she's learned, how she's teaching her kids to understand and navigate her triggers, and how opening up to her husband turned in what she feared most into her greatest source of support. This conversation is raw, heartfelt, and so important. I want everyone to never feel alone in the struggle, and that's what this conversation is all about. So Emily is an award-winning trigger recovery coach for mamas. She's an author, podcaster, and inspirational speaker. She's on a mission to help trauma surviving mamas break this cycle by managing their emotional triggers and creating a peaceful, loving home. So please join me in this conversation with Emily.
So, the work that I do now is really soul work. Um, when I was a wee tiny baby, I was abandoned by my mom and lived with my paternal grandparents for the first 6 years of my life. At which point my dad got married. I was daddy's little girl at that point because he also lived with his parents, and I wanted to be with my dad. And so I went to live with my dad and lived there for about 18 months, during which time I was abused in all of the ways. And so escaped there one snowy November Sunday and went back to live with my grandparents, and life went back to normal. But I wasn't normal anymore. I wasn't the normal little 7-year-old girl that was excited to play with my Barbies and go ride my bike and play with my friends and all of these things, because I had literally lived through hell on earth and I had no one to talk to um, that could understand what I was feeling. And, a 7-year-old doesn't have a whole lot of words to describe that kind of stuff. So I also struggled with communicating it. And I think I was 9 years old, 9 or 10 years old, when I told my grandmother that I didn't want to be alive anymore. And she looked at me in all of her boomer knowledge and said, "We don't talk that way." And so I didn't. I stuffed it down. I stuffed and I stuffed and I stuffed until I was stuffed so full my body started rebelling against me, crying for help because that's what it was doing. And it wasn't until I became a mama myself that, and that journey to becoming a mama, that I really began to understand what all of that stuffing did to my body. And, I've been on my trauma recovery journey really intensely for the last 6 or 7 years. And, you know, we would like to believe that trauma recovery is a one and done kind of a situation, but it's not. It's a journey. Healing, I don't believe I will ever be fully healed until I'm not on this earth anymore. So it's a journey. And when I was when I was 6 years old, I remember walking across the parking lot to my child psychologist and thinking, someday I'm going to help kids like me. And at that young of an age, I didn't know what that looked like. But now, many, many years, 30, almost 30 years down into the future, I know exactly what that is. And that is what I'm doing now in Mamahood After Trauma, in advocating for maternal mental health, because how we were parented is often how we parent. And that's all fine and dandy if you had a functional, healthy relationship with your parents. And if you didn't, then you've got a mountain to climb. And your kids are the mirror that kind of bring to light all of the hurt and heartache and dysfunction and things that you spent so long running from, burying, stuffing, until now it doesn't work anymore. You can't avoid it any longer. It's right in front of you, and now you have to do the work.
What did stuffing all that stuff deep down and just holding it all in do when you said that it came out and affected your body and your emotions?
Well, the first way it came out in many, many ways. The first way that it affected my body, I think I was 6 years old the first time that I had acid reflux. And I didn't know what it was. I just knew that my throat was on fire and it was coming up from my tummy. Um, and I told my dad this. He was like, "Oh, you have acid reflux." I was like, "Oh, this is horrible." And then
6 or 7.
yeah, I was 6 or 7 years
Oh,
old the first time I had acid reflux.
yeah.
So digestively, it has affected me. Um, Another way, a huge way, was hormonally. So, throughout my teenage years, I struggled with painful cycles. Like, now that I've had children, I can say that the cramps that I experienced as a teenager could compare with contractions in active labor. It was intense. Um, there was a point where I was having 2 bleeds a month. I was just so dysregulated. Um, and the response to that was to put me on birth control pills for way too long. And then fast forward to when my husband and I were trying to conceive, my body was not in the state that it needs to be to conceive a child or maintain a pregnancy. And so I struggled with infertility until I went to a naturopath, and it was the first medical experience that I had where a medical professional asked me my story, sat and listened to me share my story, and then explained to me how it was impacting my body medically. So my nervous system was stuck in activation, meaning my stress response was overactive. And if you're not aware of how your stress response being activated impacts your body, when cortisol, which is your stress hormone, is being produced, all of the other hormones, um, progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, um, all of those are not prioritized by your body. My stress response was stuck in the on position. My body was not digesting my food properly, which leads to vitamin and mineral deficiencies. My hormones were all wonky, which means you can't have a baby. And so when I was able to give my body the support and help it heal, then I was able to reduce my digestive dysfunction, giving it the support that it needed. I was able to reduce the digestive dysfunction, but I was also able to conceive a child and maintain a healthy pregnancy and do that twice.
Thank you for describing that, because I think we are starting to learn a lot more about how trauma affects the body and the incidence of chronic disease, in addition to all the mental health side effects, is real. And I can see if that's the response you're having at 6 or 7, just imagine what that's wreaking havoc on your body.
Trauma surviving women are significantly more susceptible to developing an autoimmune disease. They are significantly more susceptible to cardiac issues, so heart attack, stroke. And it's just wild to me to think that my trauma was majority emotional, but it is having a profound impact on my physical well-being.
And Emily, the hormone, the period, the fertility, the sexual effects are not talked about.
No,
about how that's impacted. And I can't imagine I hope it's better now, but I can't imagine there were a lot of gynecologists that had those discussions with their patients.
No. When I started my journey to becoming a mom, and I went to an OBGYN, and I said, when I was a teenager, I struggled a lot with painful cycles, irregular cycles, and she dismissed me. She said, "Oh, that was then, this is now." But no, those things carry through. I'm not a different person than I was then. Like physiologically, I'm the same. And it's all symptoms of something that was going on.
Yeah.
And so we have to understand that while your trauma may not have caused physiological damage, like cuts and bruises and bumps on the head or whatnot, it still impacts how your body functions.
That level of stress and toxicity, it wreaks
hugely impactful, profoundly so.
You mentioned that until you were able to, what was the word you used, to give your body what it needs?
Yeah.
You were stuck. How did you give your body what it needs? Tell people what that looked like.
So for me, the naturopath that I went to prescribed a whole slew of different natural supplements. Um, some of the supplements were aimed at caring for my stress response, helping my body get unstuck from that activated stress response. And others were aimed at uh, supplementing and restoring vitamin and mineral deficiencies. Others were aimed towards my hormones.
And imagine if you could have had that when you were in your teens
Oh,
versus how long it took to address
yeah,
that later.
yeah.
Thank you. That is something that I also just started to understand recently, was that effect that it's really not talked about very
No,
often. So
no.
you have had 2 babies now. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
yeah.
Okay.
So it took us a year to achieve a healthy pregnancy the first time, and it took us a month the second time.
Oh my goodness. And that was just with the supplementation that and the I'm assuming
The
there was
support.
some mental work that you also did to was there to
Well,
relax or
between the kids, between
okay.
the kids. So
Yes.
after I had my daughter, the trauma freight train, as I call it, really hit me.
Have you ever
Banging your head against the wall trying to navigate the complexities of a relationship impacted by childhood trauma? It doesn't have to be this daunting. When you're married to a partner with unresolved childhood trauma, it can feel like you're walking on eggshells, never quite knowing what will set them off. No matter what you try, it feels like there's always something triggering another emotional response that seems completely out of context. And the harder you try to fix it, the more discouraged you feel. So, what's the issue here? Navigating marriage with a trauma survivor is different. The love languages don't work. Date nights don't work. Self-help books don't help. But here's the good news. I've created something that does work. Something built from years of hard-earned lessons and real-life experience. Ready to take the first step toward real change? Let's talk. I'm offering a free one-on-one call where we'll dive into what's going on in your relationship and figure out a way forward together. This isn't just another quick chat. It's a chance to finally be heard, to share what you're going through with someone who truly gets it. No judgment, just real support. So if you're ready to start making sense of it all and find a little more peace in your marriage, book your free call now. Your happiness, your peace, and your relationship are worth it. Let's do it together.
Or I can stay and figure it out and give my daughter at that point the mama that she deserves. Because she wasn't asked to be born. She didn't ask to be born. She didn't ask to be put into a situation. And while I wanted to run as fast as my legs could carry me away from it because my nervous system perceived danger, she was just an innocent little baby. And I knew that if I ran, I was going to be repeating what my biological mom did. And I couldn't live with myself if I did that to her. And I also didn't want to hurt my husband because that would have really hurt him too.
Tell me about how that felt after the baby. Was it like true just panic? What have I
It
done?
was
What, tell me.
it was fear, a lot of fear. Um, I hated being a mom, and it took me a long time to understand why, because for me, growing up, mother figures weren't safe. Their love was conditional. They left, they abandoned, and they caused harm. And I didn't want to be a mother. I didn't want to be any of those things. And so I had to figure out a way to disconnect what I knew a mother to be to what I was going to be for my kids. And I did a little bit of therapy work. At that point, we were living in northern Alberta, which is incredibly rural, like 8 hours north of Edmonton, Alberta. Like there's no therapist up there, I don't think.
Nothing.
I did a few therapy sessions over Zoom, and that therapist was able to help me make the distinction between where I started and stopped, where my biological mom stopped, and where my daughter started. Because all of those lines for me were blurred. And I was sitting in the fear that I was doomed to repeat what my mom did. And that simply wasn't true. But I needed help to see it. And so when I was able to see, when the lines were clearly defined and I could see that I could make my own mamahood journey. There's a reason I use mamahood instead of motherhood. Because words matter. And my daughter could have her own childhood. She's not doomed to have the same sort of childhood hell that I had.
Tell me about the mamahood.
So, as I just mentioned, what a mother was to me.
Okay.
So, mom, mother, those words to me, when I say them, feel heavy in my heart because there's a lot of crap that happened that I associate those words with: the hurt, the pain, the abandonment, all of those types of things. But when I think of mama, there's that hurt and abandonment, and all of those emotions are not, it's lighter. It's not as heavy. And so mamahood is where I'm at.
It's warmer. I feel like it's a
Yeah.
warmer, more connected
Yeah.
word. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. So I think that becoming a mother, a mama, which
Mhm.
you did, really stems to kind of what I wanted to get to with you about creating relationships from your
Yeah.
past.
Mhm.
And I think that motherhood and then, romantic relationships are something that can be difficult because of those coping mechanisms that you use to
Mhm.
survive your
Yeah.
childhood. End up, if you don't identify it and
Mhm.
work on it, they could impact how you mom and
Mhm.
how you are in intimate relationships. Let's just start with being a mom. And you've already touched on some of them, but how did some of those coping mechanisms come to play that you were like, I really would like to do this better?
Yeah. So for me, when my kids were really little, my nervous system couldn't handle loud sounds. And, babies can't control their crying as much as,
No.
and they can't, they have no means of communicating in a more calm way.
Yep.
Their cries are it's the only way God gave them to communicate. But my nervous system couldn't handle it. their cries and their screams in infancy, in the toddler era, was a lot for my body, for my nervous system to handle. And there were days when they'd be losing their mind with a temper tantrum or crying or being inconsolable. And they just needed mommy to co-regulate with them, and I couldn't. I physically could not fulfill that need because I couldn't regulate. I didn't have the skills to regulate. And so a lot of my focus now in mamahood after trauma is trigger recovery. Because I realized a few years ago when my son was having a meltdown, and when he gets frustrated, he screams. And his scream is so high pitched, it will make your back hair stand on end. And I was trying to help him. I was trying to, tell mommy what's wrong and so I can help you. And nothing was working. And it got to the point where my nervous system was fritzed. And I lost my patience and I kicked my laundry room wall. Didn't mean to kick it hard, but I made a hole in the wall. And then I looked at the wall and I was like, crap. I shouldn't have done that. That was the wrong way to handle it. So now I've got to fess up to my husband. Hey dear, I kicked a hole in the wall. Oops, sorry.
Yeah.
But then I also have to explain to my son, you know what? Mommy overreacted. And I shouldn't have kicked a hole in the wall. And maybe I raised my voice too. At this point, I can't remember. And I'm sorry if that was scary. Mommy was insert feeling, unheard. And it wasn't your fault. It was just mommy feeling frustrated. And I'm sorry that it scared you. And I've made apologizing to my kids when my nervous system gets the better of me a regular practice. My kids can learn emotional intelligence and how to apologize with me. We can do it together. But my ability to understand my triggers and work through them hugely impacts how I show up for my kids. And so I've been on a journey of building what I call a trigger toolbox. And a trigger toolbox is essentially just a collection of could be tools. It could be things that you just have memorized so that you can use them on the go. So the breathing ball is something, and like my kids can play with this too. I've got a pair of hoop earplugs or loop earplugs that help with noise reduction. I can still hear, I can still interact, but the noise isn't as loud, as piercing, as triggering for my nervous system. And then I use different breathing techniques and affirmations and journaling, because understanding your trigger, because 9 times out of 10, when your kid is throwing a temper tantrum and you lose your mind, It's not because your kid is having a temper tantrum. It's because your kid's temper tantrum made you feel a way that you felt in your childhood that you got punished for. It's your inner child calling out for help. It's saying, hold up, I remember feeling this way, and it's not safe. So I need to do what I need to do to feel safe. And if that's yelling, if that's stomping around like a giant toddler, that's what you tend to do.
That is so much amazing work that you've been able to do. What does it feel like when you, for those of us, I mean, we have triggers. Everybody does. Everybody's
Yeah.
triggered by something and has something. But for somebody who had a traumatic past, like with the crying, what does it feel like when that triggers? Is it emotional? Does it come from deep within? Is it hard to describe?
When I get triggered, it feels my chest gets tight. I feel like I'm going to crawl out of my skin and I can't function. I can't focus. I can't so giving my hands something to do is helpful. Focusing on bringing myself back to the present with breathing, with affirmations. Because when I first started out on my journey, when I would get triggered, I love hoodies. And so when I was really early on in my postpartum days, I was living in a hoodie. So I pull my hood up, pull the drawstrings so tight that all you could see was the end of my nose, and I would curl up in a ball and I would plug my ears. So I was reducing the sound, I was limiting my visual stimulation. I was in a ball and nobody could touch me because I needed to get my body regulated. That's what it's taken for me to heal my nervous system because it was not in good shape at all. And, until I became a mom, I had coping mechanisms, not healthy ones, but I had coping mechanisms that helped me function, not as a healthy adult, but I was functional. And then I was a mom, and those coping skills didn't work anymore.
In your relationship,
Mhm.
I feel like the same things are occurring that were happening, with being a mom, and that
Mhm.
you had triggers that you had to explain or you had to regulate yourself in your relationship as well. What were some of those that were impacting your relationship?
My relationship with my husband has been one where he's been incredibly supportive. Meanwhile, I am petrified that he's going to abandon me. Like, why would he stay? And so I, for the first while after our daughter was born, I struggled with all of these fears and the trauma freight train as I refer to it on my own because I thought that it made me a horrible person, a horrible mom, and that if he knew how I felt, he was going to leave. And so in order to maintain my relationship and not be abandoned, I had to zip it and suck it up, which in retrospect, I did a terrible job because I was a hot mess express. Like I would just start crying at the drop of a pin. And he knew something was up, but I wouldn't tell him what was going on. It's a process. And right now, I'm working through parts of the sexual trauma that I endured as a little girl. And, it makes me so angry that the things that happened when I was 6 and 7 years old are impacting my relationship with my husband at 35. It's infuriating. But he is so patient with me and supportive. It's not fair to him. I'm not even going to pretend that it is fair to him. But he is doing what we need to do so that I can heal and our relationship can be free of the chains of my past.
That's what we do for people when we love them,
Mm,
no matter what.
yeah.
So opening up, and when did you realize if I don't start telling him why some of these things are happening, it's not this is going to go sour. Were you able to just kind of figure that out over time?
Well, I opened up to him. It was a rainy Saturday. We were on our way home from getting groceries. And I was sitting there looking out the window, crying as my husband was driving, and he was like, "What is wrong with you?" He was getting kind of irritated because I wasn't telling him and he knew something was up. And I was like, "Oh, fine. This is either going to go terribly wrong or he's going to, just be amazing." And, the assumptions that I made about him leaving and abandon, those were of my own creation. He had done nothing to indicate that he was going to up and leave. Nothing. And so I told him, and he was like, "Okay, how do we fix this?" I was like, "Wait, what?"
Did you think he was, yeah, you were like, he's going to leave if he knows? Yeah.
Yeah, I had convinced myself that I needed to zip my lip and power through, or he was going to leave and I was going to be abandoned with a baby and have to figure it out for myself.
So that was the moment when you started to realize I can say some of these things out loud.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's my safe place now. Between him and my journal, my safe place.
Does your husband, has he been done a lot of work understanding triggers? Or have you been able to just work on explaining how it is and working together on how to deal with them?
Yeah, he's been very receptive to me explaining how things how things impact and why certain things are triggers and all of the intricacies of that. Um, he tends to leave the work of it to me, and I will relay what he needs to know. Um, he's been my biggest support through all of this.
I'm so happy for you to have that.
Yeah, he's a blessing.
Thank you for sharing all that. I think that you being able to describe those things
Mhm.
And you've been able to do enough work where you can actually put words to it, which
Mhm.
I think is amazing for people, because both for partners of
Mhm.
trauma survivors, understanding the background a little
Mhm.
bit, and then also for other trauma survivors to be able to put words to some of the things that they just didn't, they're not feeling that they have the words for it.
Yeah. Oh, it's hard to articulate some of the stuff, the garbage. Like,
Absolutely. And so that's what I love your story for, is because it helps a lot of people just understand the background
yeah.
of what's going on and why you're seeing some of those things in such a real way. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
I have
No
one
problem.
last question for you.
Absolutely.
What is your goal for the next 2 to 4 years?
My goal is is kind of twofold, I guess. To first of all, continue my own healing and teaching my kids how to be um, emotionally intelligent and manage their emotions so they don't have quite the garbage truck of junk to process in their adulthood, but also to create tools and resources that moms can use with their kids to not only help them heal their own trauma, but also, like I'm doing with my kids, teaching them emotional intelligence, teach their kids emotional intelligence. Because we don't break generational cycles without doing preventative work. So that is my goal, is to see myself and my family flourish, but also provide the support so that other families can flourish and heal.
You know better than anybody that just pushing things under the rug
Doesn't work.
doesn't end up changing anything for the future. And
It makes
everybody will
things
just,
worse. It
yeah.
makes things worse.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing. All right, that's a wrap for today on Love and Trauma, the real deal. Big thanks to my guests for sharing their insights. Couldn't have done it without you. Now, for those of you looking to take this journey further, I've got something special. Head to my website to grab Real Tactics, Real Healing, a survivor's playbook for navigating a relationship with a trauma survivor. It's packed with everything you need to know, do, and say to navigate the emotional minefield, find your balance, and regain your self-worth and happiness.